All right, my name is Ikaika, and this is my presentation on web APIs. So what are APIs? APIs stand for programming, application programming interface. These are a set of definitions and protocols for building and integrating application software. Simply put, they are how programs and servers interact with one another. Um, Through APIs, you're able to get access to data, application resources, and methods that you don't have naturally. APIs are often locked behind keys, which you have to either purchase from the provider or through logging into or through creating an account with the server or website that's providing the server, the data. One of the most important uses for APIs in web development is collecting, is getting data and sharing data. One of the ways you can do this is through the fetch method, which I'll be discussing later in the presentation. Now, for the vast majority of data sent and received will be in the format of JSON, which stands for JavaScript object notation. And I'm going to be breaking down what it looks like and how to read it and use it inside your web pages. So JSON has four basic rules for its syntax. Here is a picture of what a JSON file would look like. And it looks a little complicated, but if you break it down, you'll be able to understand it better. The first thing you need to understand is that data is stored in a name value pair. If you look, all of these are name values. So there's ID, there's a number, there's a type, there's a string, there's a name, there's a string. They're all actually stored as strings, but yeah, that's how it'll always be. Even these different ones, there's a name batter, and then its value is actually an array instead of a single string. And that's what you have to do. For every value that is more than one, you need to have an array for it. The next rule is that data items are separated by commas. So we see ida number, comma, type, donut, comma. And so those commas are how you tell the difference. The next two rules help you understand what kind of data is inside the object. So curly brackets always hold objects, while square brackets will always hold arrays. That's really important to know later on when you're trying to access or use a specific data, to know when you're going to use an index, which is a number inside a bracket, or when you're going to use an attribute with a dot pointer. So now here I have it broken down again. So this entire document is one object. It's a donut. That's what it is. It has an ID, a name, batter, and a topping. But then there are different brackets inside of it, which are the different categories underneath it. So this donut has 4 types of batters, and it has 8 or 6 types of toppings for it. But that's pretty much how the best way to look at these is to break it down into these different groups so that it's easier for you to understand. When you look at the whole thing at once, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around. So now moving on to the fetch. So fetch is the method that I'm going to be explaining how to use with APIs. So there's 3 parts to it, really. The first part is the fetch function, is us calling the URL. So this is like having the address, and we're going to kind of go there and ask them for whatever we're getting. The second part The dot then is just explaining that after we fetch, we want to do this thing. And you can have as many dot thens if you want. It doesn't really matter. But the next important part in this dot then is getting the response. The response that they send you will not be readable right off the bat. It's going to be sent through HTTP and will need to be converted into JSON so that you can use it. And the way you do that is just by the .json method. It's quite simple. There are other ways of checking that and making sure that it converts properly, but simply put, it's just response.json. The next thing we do after that is we're taking the converted data and we're assigning it to the variable data. That's what that first part is. And the same thing with the responses. We're assigning it to the variable response and variable data, and then we're going to run this function. And the function is a simple print function. We're printing to the console. Now, the last thing you need to be aware of is that the fetch function is asynchronous, which means it will run, and as long as it takes to run, it will run. But in the meantime, the JavaScript will pass it by and do everything else it can do, and then come back to it once it's finished. There's an example of how that can adversely affect your code ahead. Now, this is the example we're going to be using. So this is a fetch from a website called api.open5e. It's all about Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm going to explain how we can use that to get this information from that website. So here in Visual Studios, I have a simple HTML document, and it's all it is I'm using it to run the script in the background. So I'm gonna start it up. It's a blank document, but here in test, we're gonna be able to run this and see what the output of these are. So is the output of what I've gotten so far. Here is the object. So it has an attribute of count with its value 2, next with null, previous with null. And then this attribute results has an array inside of it. And this holds different classes. Now, let's say we want to get the class for fighter. So because this is an attribute, we're going to have to use the dot pointer with it. So we're printing out the variable data right now, and we want specifically the results from data. So if I restart this, see now we don't have any of the other stuff. We simply have the array. And so we want specifically the fighter. So now we're going to use the index of 4. So remember, in order to use an index, you have to use brackets. We're going to put in 4. So this should only pull up the fighter. And there we have it. Now, let's say we wanted specifically the name. And so we'll go, and these are all attributes. So we're going to be using the dot pointer for it. Select name, put it in, and print it. And now we have fighter. So we've sieved through all of that information to get specifically what we wanted. Now, the next thing I want to show you is about the asynchronous. So here we have, we're going to print it out the data again. And it should have the whole list of everything that we showed before, not specifically the fighter. So I'm going to run this. And it prints out, or it pulls an error. It says uncaught reference data is not defined, which doesn't make sense because data is defined beforehand, and it's what we're using here in fighter. But what if you notice the error happened before fighter was printed. And what's happening is it takes time to fetch the data. You're reaching wherever this website is, it's sending you the information, you're converting it into JSON, and then you're running this function. And so what happens is your JavaScript will skip over the fetch while it does that on the background and move to the next thing, which is this print statement. And so because of that, it's not yet defined. So you need to remember that if you want something to be done to the data, it needs to be in a .then. And that will let it happen after everything has loaded. Now we're going to move to a second example. So here is a second HTML document. And the only thing different I have is that I have this image here, and it's blank and it has a source that's empty and alternative text. All I do is have the ID image here. So I'm going to go ahead and start this up, and you can see there's no image in here. But if we go to the JavaScript, you see it's already called it, but I called a fetch for this website, which is a GitHub repository. And this repository holds pictures of the temple. And so if we open up this, it's just an array. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to be using an index to pick which temple you want. And so I'm going to pick a random temple. I think we'll do 10. We'll do temple 10. And if we run this, it gets us, I do not know what temple that is. It is in South Jordan. That might be a typo, I don't know. But this temple, and now we look at it, there's four attribute items here. There's the dedicated date, the image URL, the location, and then the temple name. And so let's say we wanted to print this out to a website. Well, we would need the URL, and we can use the temple name as a alternative text. And so I have here a function called display image. And so what this function does is it takes the data set and it finds the dedicated or the URL image and assigns it to the variable URL image, and then the temple name and assigns it to the temple name. That's what it's doing right here. And then it changes the attribute. It sets the attribute for the element item to be the URL and to be the temple name. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the function display image and replace right here the console log function. And so what it should do is it should print out the image of the temple to our web page. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh this and open it. And here we have the temple that we've received from the URL. And if we inspect it, here we have the alternative text is the name of that temple. So to explain it again, the fetch, we've called the website, we've gotten the response back, we've converted the response into JSON, we've assigned that data to the variable data, and we've ran that data through the display image function, which set the image to that URL and to that data name. To summarize, APIs let you access data, functions, and applications which you don't have. The data that you receive from these APIs are most often in the JSON format. The fetch function allows you to be able to use APIs in your JavaScript and to have access to those data. And then the last thing, which is real important, data received from APIs must be converted to JSON first and then used asynchronously, which means in order. It has to be in a .then in order for it to run in a timely manner. That's been my presentation. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and leave it in the in the reply section below, and I'll try to get back as fast as I can. Thank you for watching.